This is Human Biology Notes number 4. In these sets of notes, we're going to be looking at the definition of a species, how scientists classify organisms into different kingdoms and domains, and then we're going to be looking into viruses, which are considered non-living and classified a little bit differently. The first thing that we're going to define is species. A species is a group of organisms that have two things. One, they have similar traits or look the same. And two, they can reproduce and create fertile offspring. So, fertile, you may have not heard of that word, but fertile means that they can have babies themselves. So, for example, a lion and a tiger. If a lion and a tiger mate, they create a liger. Okay? A liger cannot have babies. It's not fertile at all. That is why a lion and a tiger are considered different species. Even though they look somewhat similar to each other, they wouldn't normally reproduce in nature. We make them reproduce, and we create a liger. But if you were to put a lion and a tiger in a cage together, they wouldn't reproduce. So it's only a scientific invention of a liger. We have to make them reproduce and create a liger. Now, the reason why scientists classify organisms is because this is a way to organize and name all of the different species. Think about if I said that there was a cat outside of my window. For me, it would probably mean a little kitty cat. But say I'm saying that in Africa, a cat outside my window might be a wild cat, like a tiger or a leopard. So organizing animals and naming them properly is really important for scientists to make sure that they're talking about the same thing and to see the relationships that exist between all species. The first scientist that began to name and organize the animals and different organisms was Linnaeus. His name was Linnaeus, and he decided to group things from the most broad to the most specific. So for example, if I were to say, where am I sitting right now? The most broad thing that I could say is the universe, but the most specific thing I could say is in Keefe Tech High School in room 307. So the most broad category that he discovered or he named was a kingdom. Now we have 6 groups or 6 kingdoms. They are eubacteria, archaea bacteria, protist, fungi, plants, and animals. And then we get even more and more specific. Phylum, class, order, family, genus, and the most specific, species. These are hard to remember, but if you take the first letter of each of them, you can spell something. K, P, C, O, F, P. You can remember it. King Philip came over for grape soda, or we're going to be learning about another classification that goes even before kingdom. Linnaeus didn't have this, but now we do, and it's known as domain. So if you remember D, K, P, C, O, F, G, S, you can remember dumb kids playing catch on freeways get smashed. Now, in order to name a organism scientifically, the scientist uses the genus and the species of the organism. So for example, if we're talking about humans, the genus that we belong to is Homo, and the species that we belong to is Sapiens. So to correctly say our scientific name, it would be Homo sapiens. Now today, we classify organisms a little bit differently because we have more technology. So if we're classifying organisms into our really specific categories, we're going to be looking at the DNA of organisms and seeing how similar they are, and we're going to be looking at the evolutionary relationships, how these things came to be. But if we're looking at big picture, these broad ways of classifying organisms, we're going to use broad things. We're going to be using, are they prokaryotes or eukaryotes? Do they make their own food, or do they have to eat food? All of these things when we're looking at classifying into the broader categories. So now we have an even more broad category that Linnaeus didn't have, and they are called domains. This is the largest and least specific, our most broad classification. The 3 domains that we have are called archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Easy way to remember the three is that it spells Abe, like Abe Lincoln. The first two are two types of bacteria that are very different, even though they're both bacteria. They're not related at all, so they're classified into two different domains. And eukarya are all of the eukaryotes, the things that have a nucleus. And then the next largest classification that we learned from Linnaeus is a kingdom. So the 6 kingdoms we looked at before: archaea bacteria, eubacteria, protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. Those are all fancy terms, but they are very, very important. So remember, easy way to remember this: dumb kids playing catch on freeways get smashed. Or dashing King Philip came over for grape soda. So here are the major differences between these kingdoms. First thing I want to point out is the 3 domains. Remember, it spells Abe. Here we have it a little out of order. So under bacteria, the domain bacteria, we only have 1 kingdom, eubacteria. Under the domain archaea, we only have 1 kingdom, archaea bacteria. Remember, these are our 2 types of bacteria. Our last domain, eukarya, is all of the things that have a nucleus inside of them. So protists, like amoeba and kelp. Fungi, like mushrooms and yeast. Plants, like trees. And animalia, like us and chimps. You can see the major difference between them. Obviously, eukarya has all eukaryotes, whereas bacteria, we know, are always prokaryotes. They're very, very simple. They don't have a nucleus. And then you can see other differences, such as the difference between their cell structures, the difference between the number of cells, how they get their food, and then you have examples of all of them. Okay, something to point out is right here. Almost every single one of them have cell walls. You can see cell walls, cell walls, cell walls, either with or without something. But animals are the only one that do not have cell walls and do not have chloroplasts. Viruses. Viruses are considered non-living. They're considered parasites because they harm a living thing while they benefit. A virus has a really simple structure. All it is its DNA or RNA, a nucleic acid, and then a protein shell around it. And they have to infect a host cell in order to replicate. That's why they're considered non-living. They can't reproduce on their own. They have to use our cells in order to reproduce. So the host cell is the cell that is being infected. They can infect animals, they can infect plants, they can infect humans. So viruses are really widespread in what they can infect. So here's what a virus looks like. I said earlier it was really simple structure. It contains DNA or RNA, and then it has a shell of protein around it. That shell is called a capsid, a cap. And viruses are classified based on the nucleic acid that they contain. So if they have DNA, they're considered a DNA virus. If they have RNA, they're an RNA virus. And then there's a special type called a retrovirus, like HIV, that's going to change. So here we have virus structure. You can see these are all 3 types of viruses, and even though they look very different, they have the same basic structure. They all have DNA or RNA inside of them, and then they're surrounded by some capsid, some strange shape. So here this one looks like a little suction cup. Here this one looks like a little Jimmy Neutron character. But they all have the same basic structure. And viruses, like I said, need a host cell. So a virus would attach to a cell. It would inject the DNA inside of a cell. Oops. Sorry. It would inject its DNA into a cell. Then it would use all of the things inside of the cell to replicate, and eventually it would create so many viruses that the cell would burst open. So a virus, again, is not considered living. The reason why it's not considered living are these reasons: that it can only reproduce with a host cell. It can't reproduce on its own like normal living cells. It also does not grow and develop. It also does not obtain and use energy. and it does not respond to the environment. These reasons are the reasons why viruses are not considered cells. They are considered non-living organisms.